Hey there, internet friends, and welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. Each and every week, we dive into a different Disney Plus offering and discuss its history, how it holds up today, and our general impressions. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and joining me this week, we have Logan Wilkinson back once again. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing good.
Excellent, excellent. Today we're going to be talking all about A Bug's Life as we continue our Pixar month. If you
Mhm.
like the show, we would of course love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, ring notification bells on YouTube, all the things that will help any algorithms that you anticipate could use some help. So yes, this is A Bug's Life. Once again, picked because of our Pixar month here in the month of April. We're doing basically Pixar old and new. We've done the last couple weeks on Turning Red and Luca to represent the new side of Pixar things. So now we're jumping way, way back to early
To
days
the
of
old,
Pixar.
yeah.
For the old ones here with A Bug's Life, and then next week with Monsters Inc. Basically, we're going to keep Toy Story out there for probably a month of its own dedicated Toy Story episodes.
Yeah,
So yeah,
that seems like a safe
hop
video.
into some of these early, I would say standalones, but then they did end up eventually making a Monsters University.
Monsters
But,
University.
some of these other early offerings from Pixar. So yes, diving into the history lesson here, originally released November 25th, 1998, which was, I believe, 3 years. Yeah, we'll get into it in a sec. 3 years after kind of the breakout success of Toy Story. Other releases of the time, you had the DreamWorks film Ants, came out October 2nd.
Yes.
Very similarly themed, almost
Yes.
intentionally so. If you follow the history behind Jeffrey Katzenberg and his, very strong split from Disney in the creation of DreamWorks. Basically, there's a whole kind of like feud between Disney, Pixar, and DreamWorks, and there's basically allegations thrown that Jeffrey Katzenberg just kind of stole the idea about doing a movie about bugs when he went to DreamWorks, whereas the Bugs Life story had been well known and well kind of like discussed in the animation community at that time. There's a fun little
They're
Wikipedia.
very different movies.
Oh yeah, obviously very different movies,
Very
but like
tonally
in the
different.
lead
Yeah.
up to and marketing
Yeah.
of it was that like Dante's Peak Volcano or Deep Impact Armageddon kind of like, oh, two studios both, miraculously landed on the same idea to release
The
around the
exact
same
same
time.
time.
So yeah, this Ants, did beat this one to market by about a month, almost 2 months there, October 2nd. I've still never seen Ants.
Have you
And
not?
I've not, no. And I have like zero interest in seeing it when you have Woody Allen as like the main ant. Um, yeah,
Oh, that's right.
yeah.
Ants is so. I mean, I can vouch for Ants. Then Ants is weird as shit. Ants is one of the weirdest movies I think I've ever seen as a kid. It And like for years, it was so easy to get these two mixed up. But then, like having recently rewatched Bugs Life, even before this podcast, like a year ago or so, A Bug's Life has its issues that we'll get into and kind of problem areas. But like, it is ultimately like a pretty lighthearted, colorful, fun Pixar movie. Ants is like very dark, and it went like the opposite direction. It was like, what if we make a grounded, gritty insect movie
Hmm.
about like war and the military industrial complex kind of and like it sure did that. And even as a kid, it was strange. And looking back at it now as a 30-year-old adult, it's even weirder. Yeah, it's a very strange movie.
Yeah. And then completely outside of this, you eventually have what B movie entering the conversation that
Yeah,
has Jerry Seinfeld
Jerry
as a bee
Seinfeld.
just straight up in a relationship with a human woman, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Another one I'm just like, yeah, I don't need to see that.
It's
Um,
weird.
yes. Yes. In addition to Ants, we had a favorite of that D Plus show, Halloween Town, came out October 17th. There in 1998.
We stand our
Life
Cromwell Queens.
There you go. Life is Beautiful came out October 23rd.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that kind of in the breakdown. I was like, oh, I remember that one with the guy who jumped on the seats at the Oscars,
Yes,
Roberto
for
Benigni.
best actor.
Yeah. And then we never heard from him again, really, in American cinema.
Yeah, I'm sure
his one-hit wonder stuff. We had, for fans of the Adam Sandler era, The Waterboy came out November 6th. The Rugrats movie came out November 20th.
Hell yeah.
A Bug's Life Here, basically in that Thanksgiving weekend slot for November 25th. The controversial Best Picture winner, Shakespeare in Love, would come out December 11th.
Don't even get me started.
And then Patch Adams would be one of the kind of highlights to close out the year there, December 25th on Christmas. Runtime of 1 hour and 35 minutes. And in the Pixar timeline of things, this, as I said, came 3 years after Toy Story, which had released November 22nd, 1995. Bug's Life Here in November 1998. Would be followed by Toy Story 2 the following year, November 24th, 1999. And then Monsters, Inc., November 2nd, 2001. So, the Wayback Machine there. Yeah. Roll call, our who's who of the film. We have John Lasseter directing the film, who prior to this had done a handful of Pixar shorts, as well as he directed Toy Story, and would go on to direct films like Toy Story 2, Cars, and Cars 2 with Pixar. Andrew Stanton is also on this one as a co-director. He had also worked on a few of the Pixar shorts in the lead up to this, and this was his first basically feature length. And then he would go on to direct Finding Nemo, WALL-E, John Carter in the real life thing, Finding Dory, and then most recently he's directed a couple episodes of Stranger Things and an episode or two of Better Call Saul. So doing a little bit of stuff on the TV side of things. The writers were John Lasseter, Andrew Stanton, Joe Raft, all doing the story on that. Lasseter pretty much working on the exact same Pixar things he had worked on as a director, a handful of Pixar shorts, Toy Story 2, Cars. He would go on and do the story for Toy Story 3 as well, even though he didn't direct that one. And then Cars 2. Andrew Stanton, prior to his Pixar work, had done some, he was a writer on Mighty Mouse, The New Adventures. He'd also worked on Toy Story before this. Would go on to be the writer for Toy Story 2, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, WALL-E, Toy Story 3, John Carter, Finding Dory, and in the future from now, he is currently credited as a writer of one of the episodes of the upcoming Obi-Wan Kenobi series.
Oh yeah, we love that.
So be interesting to see how those all play out. And then the last original story hereby was Joe Ranft, who kind of along with his, that early founding crew of Pixar. Prior to Pixar days, though, he had written The Brave Little Toaster and Oliver and Company, as well as The Rescuers Down Under, Beauty and the Beast, and The Lion King. So he had like a good kind of animation writing repertoire under his belt in the lead up to this. And then, of course, Toy Story. And he would go on to write Cars after this, before his unfortunate early passing, or passing at a young age, relatively young age, among the Pixar crew. Adding to the screenplay, Don McEnery, and Bob Shaw, a writing team that had written an episode or two of Seinfeld prior to this, as well as they'd written on the Hercules film, as well as, I think, they're credited for like the Hercules series, but I think it's more like based on characters by kind of stuff. So shout out to that writing team. On the starring side, we have
90s.
Yes,
it's a starring by cast.
This is a very eclectic cast. Yeah. We have Dave Foley starring as Flick, who at this time was best known to audiences for his Canadian sketch troupe, The Kids in the Hall, which, bringing it back full circle, just had their trailer that they've got coming back to Amazon Prime soon. He was also, of course, known for news radio at the time. Kevin Spacey as Hopper had, of course, done stuff like The Usual Suspects and Seven in the lead up to this, and then would go on to do films like American Beauty, show like House of Cards and Baby Driver, and then now he's basically persona non grata for his abuse allegations and just
Yeah.
general shittiness.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating kind of like looking back at this movie and being like, yeah, I guess I can see why he wouldn't have a problem being a villain character like he is so often. Julia Louis-Dreyfus playing Ada, of course, was known to audiences at this time for her work on Seinfeld. She would go on to be basically a perennial TV star in the New Adventures of Old Christine, as well as Veep. She's returned to the Pixar fold with Onward a couple years ago. And she can currently seen occasionally in the MCU as Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, first appearing in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, as well as Black Widow.
Yeah.
A very young Hayden Panettiere playing Dot in this. In the lead up to this, she'd basically been on the soap opera One Life to Live. Following this, she would go on to be in stuff like Guiding Light. Remember the Titans is certainly the first thing like I remember seeing her in. But she was also Kairi in the early Kingdom Hearts games. One of the kind of trio of main characters that's not like a Disney original character. In that, she'd play Kairi / Xion until Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance. She, of course, was also in series like Heroes. She was in the game Until Dawn, of course, and the TV series Nashville. But yeah, there's a very young Hayden Panettiere playing Dot in this one. Phyllis Diller playing the Queen, one of the first female comics to become a U.S. household name.
Yep.
She had her own kind of variety series back in the 50s or 60s, the Phyllis Diller Show. And then following this, she would go on to play roles in The Adventures of Jimmy Neutron as Jimmy Neutron's grandmother, I guess. And she was also in The Bold and the Beautiful. On the Bug Circus side of not the Bug Circus side of things yet. Richard Kind here as Molt, Hopper's inept brother, was known to audiences at this time for shows like Mad About You and Spin City. Since then, he returned to the Pixar fold in Inside Out as Bing Bong, and most recently could be seen in Tick Tick Boom.
It's true.
As Bloom. As the non-Sondheim writer.
I should also be remiss if I didn't give Richard Kind a shout out for Spin City, which is a show I love, but also for his great recurrent arc as hypochondriac on Scrubs.
Yep. David Hyde Pierce playing Slim was, of course, known as Niles from Frasier at this time, as well as basically the spin-off character to Sideshow Bob with The Simpsons. And then after this, he would go on to do Wet Hot American Summer and basically everything related to that. And he also does a lot of Broadway stuff. I, for example, got to see him in Spamalot in 2000. What would that have been? 2005 on Broadway. Joe Ranft played Heimlich here. As I said, he also, in addition to kind of the writing of The Brave Little Toaster, he was also a voice in Brave Little Toaster. He was a voice. He was who was he? He was the binoculars guy in Toy Story 1. And then I believe he took over, or he was the penguin Wheezy in Toy Story 2. And would go on to do other little miscellaneous voice characters in Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, and Cars. Dennis Leary as Francis, of course, was a well-known stand-up comic from the 80s and 90s. He was also in The Sandlot as one of his earlier film roles, as well as Operation Dumbo Drop. And then following this, he would have a recurring regular voice acting gig in the Ice Age films, as well as doing live action stuff with his series Rescue Me. And he was Captain Stacy in the Amazing Spider-Man movie with Andrew Garfield. Jonathan Harris playing Manny was He was in the original Lost in Space crew. He also had like a recurring character on the original My Favorite Martian series. And then he did like a lot of VO work in the 90s prior to this. Madeline Kahn playing Gypsy Moth, of course, iconic actress from films like Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, and Clue. Bonnie Hunt as Rosie. Prior to this, had just done Jumanji a few years earlier, as well as her own short-lived sitcom Bonnie and Jerry Maguire. And then she would come back in to Pixar's fold in Monsters Inc., and then more notably in Cars and Toy Story 3. She was also in the Cheaper by the Dozen film with Steve Martin, and she was in Zootopia. Michael McShane playing Tuck and Roll, who I like otherwise would not have probably called out here, but I do want to give a shout out to him because I remember watching him specifically on the Comedy Central airings of Whose Line Is It Anyway, which were like the British version of the show. He was a regular on that before it came over and got Drew Carified. And that's like who I always remember him from. He was also in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and Richie Rich in the lead up to this, and then would go on to be in Office Space. And he's the voice of Sid in Final Fantasy X and X-2, for those that know those games. John Ratzenberger as P.T. Flea, of course, had been in many, many Pixar things, but prior to this, he'd also been, of course, in Cheers. Brad Garrett as Dim, from Everybody Loves Raymond at this point, and then would go on to return to the Pixar fold in Ratatouille, and he would also make an appearance in Tangled in the Disney universe. And then lastly, just a bevy of other like who's who among this voice cast in kind of more miscellaneous roles. You have Bill Farmer, who's been the voice of Goofy since 1987, voicing various male ants. Jess Harnell, playing who's the voice of Wacko from the Animaniacs. He plays the Bus Beetle, or Bus Bettle, as is credited on IMDb. Christina Milian was a pop star of the early 2000s after this movie. She voiced some of the female ants. Russie Taylor voiced some of the female ants. She was also Minnie Mouse from 1986 until her passing in 2019, as well as the voice of Martin and others on The Simpsons. And Ashley Tisdale was the lead Blueberry Scout prior to playing Sharpay in the High School Musical series. And then a couple of cameos here from other notable Pixar cameos. Lee Unkrich plays Ant Number 1. Would go on to direct a number of direct or co-direct a number of Pixar films like Toy Story 2, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, Toy Story 3, and most recently Coco. And then John Lasseter was Bug Zapper Bug Number 1, of course, the director of this film, and the chief creative officer at Pixar until 2017-2018, when he took a long-term sabbatical from Pixar and Disney Animation, and then later left at the end of his contract at the end of that year, following allegations of sexual misconduct. So, goodbye, John Lasseter. Now on to trivia. Some of the Pixar staples. A lot of the Pixar staples that we talk about in a lot of these like Pixar D plus shows had not yet been established. So like the Luxo Ball does not make an appearance in this film. The trend of including it in every Pixar movie really hadn't come up yet. A113 is still located in here, notably on the side of a cardboard box. Box also says 1195 because Toy Story number 1 was Pixar's first film and released in 1995. The Pizza Planet Band was established by this point and makes an appearance in just after the circus scene as the camera tilts up from the circus scene. And then, of course, John Ratzenberger having his cameo in here, cameo / like a supporting role as P.T. Flea. And the last little Easter egg that I have in here that would be like the tease of setting up the next Pixar movie, not really established in here unless you want to count like the Toy Story teases as the setup for Toy Story 2. But they hadn't really gotten in the habit of kind of laying the groundwork for what would come next. this early in the Pixar run. Other trivia, this is the first Pixar film to have outtakes. The outtakes were shown theatrically and on VHS, but are only available in the bonus features on the DVD and Blu-ray versions of the film. Outtakes are also available on Disney Plus, and they basically had like 2 separate runs of outtakes. There is the run that is currently visible in the Disney Plus version of the film in the end credits, and then there is a bonus feature that is like an alternative set of outtakes that I believe was used in like re-release theatrical re-releases of the film. Gypsy was Madeline Kahn's last voice role before her death in 1999, a year after this movie was released in theaters. Iconic story of this era, so I'll go ahead.
This is what I was going to bring up, so
yeah.
I'm glad it's in the trivia.
Yep. During the summer of 1994, Pixar's story department began turning their thoughts to their next film, while Toy Story was in post-production. Storyline for A Bug's Life originated in a lunchtime conversation between John Lasseter, Andrew Stanton, Pete Docter, and Joe Ranft, the studio's head story team. Toy Story 2, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, and WALL-E were also conceived at this lunch. So kind of just a murderer's row of those early years of Pixar. Lasseter and his story team had already been drawn to the idea of insects as characters. Insects, like toys, were within the reach of computer animation at the time due to their relatively simple surfaces. Stanton and Raff wondered whether they could find a starting point in Aesop's fables, The Ant and the Grasshopper. Walt Disney had produced its own version with a cheerier ending decades earlier in the 1934 short film The Grasshopper and the Ants. In addition, Walt Disney Animation Studios had considered producing a film in the late 80s entitled Army Ants that centered around a pacifist ant living in a militaristic colony, but it never fully materialized. But again, that's kind of what DreamWorks ended up doing with Ants this same year.
It's very similar.
Yeah. So yes, that kind of iconic lunch where they just broke the story for, was that 2, 3, I think at least 2 future Academy Award winning movies, because this still predates when there was a Best Animated Film.
Feature.
Best Animated Feature Oscar category. So that won't come around until next week with Monsters, Inc. Last little trivia we have there is the short film Jerry's Game was shown before this film in theaters in the United States, and it was the first Pixar short to precede a full-length feature film, which would become kind of a recurring theme or recurring feature of Pixar movies as well, of course. Which, eventually, in the kind of like tying it full circle to Turning Red, eventually you get something like Bow that goes out there, makes a whole bunch of waves, and then as well as even like the Luca one from last week, the La Luna, both of those like were Pixar shorts, and then the people behind those Pixar shorts then got basically handpicked to do Luca and Turning Red respectively. So shout out to all of that. All right. So Logan, I will throw it to you, and I know you and I have talked about this a little bit off air and stuff. But how does this movie, this Pixar movie from 1998, how do you think it holds up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the caveat, right? It's from 1998. It's the second ever Pixar movie, right? Is important to note. But I mean, in a lot of ways, I think A Bug's Life is a victim of its timing. I think if A Bug's Life came out in like the 2010s, which I think is a relatively weak decade for Pixar films, it wouldn't have been as, it wouldn't feel like as much of a miss as I think it does for a lot of Pixar fans. But I mean, I pulled up the list of Pixar films here. This is the run Pixar went on. It went Toy Story, A Bug's Life, Toy Story 2, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Cars, Ratatouille, WALL-E, Up, Toy Story 3 were the first 11 movies of the studio over a 15-year stretch. That is a almost flawless run of films with the exception of A Bug's Life, and depending on who you ask, Cars. But otherwise, those are essentially all home run classic films of the era. And so I think A Bug's Life kind of has the misfortune to essentially fall in this like golden age of Pixar films, right? Where like so many people of our generation grew up watching these films and loving them, and where Pixar really became Pixar and didn't have like a single dud. And A Bug's Life sort of is just like this weird, forgotten, like redheaded stepchild of just like the other ones, right? Like people kind of think, I think Pixar went Toy Story, Toy Story 2, and then kind of went from there. And it is like, oh, I was here before Toy Story 2, actually, kind of guys. And that's sort of unfair to A Bug's Life, that it kind of had to go up against so many other great films, right? Like we talk a lot on that Bond show about grading on a curve with those movies and how it hurts or helps those movies at given times. And I think here A Bug's Life is unquestionably hurt by grade on a curve of what Pixar movies are, and in particular that era Pixar films. I think A Bug's Life is fine. I watched it 2 years ago, the first time probably in 15 years, when the pandemic first started. Me and Shravia watched, a whole sweep of Pixar movies. And a lot of my initial thoughts are still kind of the same from there, if maybe a bit less immediately like antagonistic to it. The movie's too long, which is an insane thing to say for a 95-minute movie, but it's too long. I still think it has an issue like navigating to the right ending. I think those are real concerns I have. Some of the cast I think is fairly hit or miss. What I will say to A Bug's Life credit though is that this is a movie that has such a charm to it still. And I sort of am bummed out I didn't get to ever go to Disneyland when they had like the Bug's Life city essentially, because I feel like it could have been fun to like experience that, and I feel like that would have been one of those areas that just felt so distinct and different, because A Bug's Life does have such a different kind of style than a lot of the other Pixar movies around it.
It's
yeah,
I would say like, because we went obviously, and you especially like at night you loved the Cars Land side of things. I would like The Bug's Life was more or less like, there were a few Bug's Life rides. It was very much a like little kids kind of section of the park,
right.
in the same way that like we didn't really do Fantasyland at all on the Disneyland side of things. A Bug's Life was very much that.
For California.
The theming of the land that kind of I think did set itself apart would be like, it was very Honey, I Shrunk the Kids style. It was you are walking in this area the size of a bug, and so like it's giant blades of grass around you and things like that kind of as like the decorative elements around the park. But like, even as somebody who went there a handful of times when a bug went, like I basically never really like ventured over into the Bug's Life area of the park, because like I didn't need to go on the ride that was basically like a Heimlich caterpillar that just kind of like goes around and around on a very small, it's like one of those roller coasters that's just a circle for little kids and just kind of like goes up and down. I'm pretty sure it was like one of those. And so it was just it was never like a draw to that part of the park for me, at least.
I think I think it's fine. I think Dave Foley and Julia Louis-Dreyfus are great because of course they're going to be great. I actually never really liked Hopper. He was probably the villain that most freaked me out as a kid of any of the early Pixar movies. He's just, because he is just so unabashedly just evil and nasty and angry, and so like he freaked me out as a kid. I would have been 6 when this came out, right? So like I was a perfect age to be like freaked out by that, and like it was so strange and funny how like reflexive almost that was. And I watched it 2 years ago where Shravia was just like, oh yeah, like I just don't like him. And it works so great now because Kevin Spacey is trash. But easily my favorite part of A Bug's Life, and I think the part that does hold up the best and that shines through so much of this movie is the little circus troupe. and these like weird oddball characters with their like eccentric natures and personalities and quirks, they form such a great kind of fun, endearing family that like I wish more of the movie was just about them, right? And kind of whenever we get removed from that or they have to like break up temporarily, I'm kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, like this the movie is kind of be a bit of a slog again. But yeah, I mean, I think it is a good movie. Well, it's a fine to good movie, right? It's an okay to good movie. It's a 6 or 7 range for me. I'm more curious. I already know my thoughts. We've talked about my thoughts a lot. I'm more curious to see where you're at in terms of watching this movie again for the first time, and I would guess a number of years for you.
Yeah, it's definitely been a while since I've sat down and rewatched A Bug's Life. And it's, I mean, the original, yeah, originally when it came out, I would have seen this in theaters.
Mm-hmm.
I would have been a teenager, I
Mm-hmm.
was 13 when it came out basically. So it was, a prime era for me and my friends to go see. And we
Go
love
see
Disney
everything.
stuff and Pixar stuff. So we would go see it in theaters, or I would see it with my family or something like that. Um, and I'm sure I liked it more at the time.
Sure.
But yeah, like going back to it and revisiting it all these years, especially after again that kind of like the onslaught of like just like hit after hit after hit that you would get. Like I would
Yeah.
in the early era of Pixar, I would put this in terms of like recognizability and like when you think of those Pixar movies, like this is down at the bottom of the list
Oh yeah.
alongside Ratatouille. And Ratatouille,
Yeah.
a much better movie, I think.
I agree.
And I think but I think didn't didn't capture
Didn't
like the
permeate pop culture.
childlike,
Yeah.
nature or
Yeah.
certainly the
Ratatouille's fine.
marketing, of like a
Yeah.
Cars or something like that.
Yeah.
Um so I think like of that early era, yeah, this is probably on the lower end. And of Pixar overall, I would say like, I can think of The Good Dinosaur is one that I like less than this.
Never seen the good
And
dinosaur, so I'm lucky, I
and
guess.
like definitely Cars 2. Um
Yeah, Cars 2's rough.
like both of those I think are
Cars.
are just like not good
Yeah.
Pixar movies.
Yeah.
But everything else this, so this is, by the nature of that, near the bottom of my list in Pixar side of things.
That's what I was just kind of trying to figure out in mine.
But I would
Yeah.
still say like this and above are good movies, and I will like, be happy to sit
Hmm.
down, especially if I had like kids, having them do this one. I think there's like a ton
Finding
of
Dory.
slapstick fun in this one,
Yeah.
that can be had. Yeah, I guess Finding Dory is probably another one. Like Finding Dory I've watched like once in theaters, and I don't think I've
Mhm.
ever circled back around to it. um and like I enjoyed it fine, but yeah, it's definitely a forgettable one of
Right.
kind of the modern era of Pixar. Um, but yeah, so revisiting this, I think it definitely like pales in comparison to kind of the era that would surround it. And especially it being sandwiched in between Toy Story 1 and 2 definitely doesn't help things. I think for me, one of the things that really stands out is just and I made a point of really going through all of them in the kind of like who's who of this, is there are just too many characters in this,
Mm.
and
Mm.
I think
Mm.
because of that, I don't think any of them really get like a huge chance to shine. Like everybody
Yeah,
gets like
that's
their
totally
one or
fair.
two moments, versus like in Toy Story you have, of course, Buzz and
An
Woody,
ensemble, yeah.
and then like the ensemble has moments around it. But here, that ensemble is split in like two different part. You've got like the ants ensemble and then the like circus bugs ensemble,
I mean,
and
even like the bad guy
all of them,
grasshopper ensemble
exactly, yeah,
too,
yeah.
right?
And so like all of those are fighting for time in
Yeah.
this, in a way that like you say it's a too long a movie. I feel like it's almost, for me, it's more time might have benefited it, because it could have given a
Mm.
little bit more for each of
Interesting.
those to do. As it is,
Yeah.
like if we had talked a week ago about like, hey, who are the circus bugs in this, I would have remembered the Dennis Leary ladybug, I would have remembered the David Hyde
Mhm.
Pierce, and I would have remembered Heimlich. and that's probably about it. I would have completely forgotten about Tuck and Roll, and their
Yeah.
little like shtick and banter and back and forth. I would have completely forgotten about Rosie, the Black Widow. I would have completely forgotten
Hmm.
about Manny and the Gypsy Moth. Um,
Yeah.
just because, like, again, I don't think they have a moment that each of them get, but I don't think they get like much more than that. So they don't leave a lasting impression on me some 20 years down the line. Um,
Right.
Compared to like I could, because I think Heimlich and what's Slim and friggin' Francis Ladybug, I think
Mm.
they all get multiple moments to like
Mm.
focus in on their joke and have their little bits of slapstick, um, in a way that a lot of the other characters don't. I would have like, if you had told me Richard Kind was in this movie a week ago, I would have been like, I don't remember that at all. I guess he must be one of the circus
Sure.
bugs. And then it's like,
Right.
no, he's Hopper's brother or cousin or whatever it is. He's like, he is the dumb sidekick to the bad guy. And like, as soon as I'm watching the movie again, some of that starts coming back.
Their characters come back.
But it's very much like, it's so bloated with characters,
Yeah.
that I just don't think enough of them get a real chance to shine in. And admittedly, also, like, I would say this is probably a relatively straightforward plot. Um,
Mm. Yeah.
like, and like, to your point of Hopper, like Hopper is, I think, the most just like classically over the top, no redemption,
Villain.
like bad
Yeah.
guy for like just to be a bad guy kind of villain in it. And I think Pixar has, for the most part, um shied away from doing those kinds of villains.
Yeah.
They tend, like, a lot of Pixar villains just tend to have more layers or more flavor to
Yeah.
them, in a way that, like, this one, like, there's a I think some of it's also certainly colored by the Kevin Spacey factor of it now,
Sure.
because I think there is, if I'd watched this 5 years ago or something like that, before all that stuff really started coming out, I probably would have been like, oh, there's like a mustache twirly charm to him just like relishing being the bad guy in this.
Hmm.
Um, and it's especially, I think, interesting in contrast to, like, something like Turning Red, or some of the other kind of Disney Pixar animated things recently that, like, we've talked about, where like the villain is generational trauma and familial
Right.
trauma, and it's like, here, no, it's just a bad guy who
Right.
is very easily and very willing to squish your head because he wants to exploit your, like, your people for power and for like food. um
Hmm.
and I mean, like, even the one scene that we get kind of where he's like has no problem revealing, like, to everybody, he's like the reason we're going to stay and keep the pressure on them is because they outnumber us, and if they ever realize that, then, like, we're screwed. Like, the fact that that scene is happening in an effectively, like, old town western saloon kind of like setting in the bug
Yeah.
thing, it is just like he is just Snidely Whiplash with with the twirling mustache, effectively. So
Yeah.
I definitely think they were leaning into that, but I think it is, especially because, arguably, like, as the follow-up to Toy Story, like, you go back and watch Toy Story, arguably Woody is the villain of that movie for a lot of that movie.
Oh, yeah.
In
Him
his
and like the kid next door. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
was
mean,
just thinking
like,
about
yeah,
that.
Sid is the, like, very obvious, like, bad guy as a kid, but like Woody does a lot of bad things out of jealousy for the new toy Buzz
Right.
in that first Toy Story movie, and it's not until the end of the movie that they really kind of like get their camaraderie going, and then the future Toy Stories end up setting very clear antagonists against them. But like, that first Toy Story is a much more nuanced kind of like
Yeah.
set of like your protagonists kind of like arguably both being protagonists just working in opposition toward one another. So like, this is a very, like, obviously very different path for
I'm
that kind of storytelling.
I'm curious too, because like the movie that most speaks to me in terms of like has a similar dynamic to this would be like Monsters Inc. with Randall.
Mm-hmm.
But even there, Randall is played so differently, I think, than Hopper's, where like Hopper is just like, he's evil. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he's just a bad guy. And like Randall, it is more almost like he is a bad guy, mostly just to be like a bad guy. But like Randall's almost played more to me as like he's just kind of an asshole,
Yeah.
right? Like he's just kind of an asshole, and he wants to be the best, and like that's sort of it, right? Like he's not like just evil to be evil, right? Like he's just kind of
Yeah.
like like he's just kind of a dickhead.
He's
And that's about
conniving.
it.
He's trying
Yeah,
to be the best scarer.
right. He
And
wants to cheat to win.
yeah.
That's yeah.
And he knows how to do that, and Mike and Sully, get in the way of that kind of thing.
Yeah. And even there, like Randall is like I feel like he has more fun and comedic moments
Yeah.
than like I think it's something like the chase scenes of like him wearing different outfits, right? Like that never happens with Hopper. Like that would be totally like disingenuous to like what this character has been in the movie for him to like now be in like funny and silly outfits chasing after people.
Yeah. That's very much that. It's Hopper is just like a bad guy, and his like one note is menace, whereas
Yeah.
Randall, there's humor, and like he is like routinely
Monsters Inc. is so good,
like
isn't it?
like people are routinely getting the one up on Randall, including Boo. And yes, we'll
Yes.
talk a lot about this next week in next week's
Yeah.
episode.
Stay tuned.
But yeah, I'm like when I think of other quote unquote bad villains in Pixar stuff, I would think about like the guy from Up, who like
yeah.
just is very clearly like a third act because they need a third act villain, and so suddenly this guy comes in and is just ready to kill a kid and an old man.
Even in Up though, right? There's more nuance to him in the sense of like because he was like a world famous explorer. Who kind of got,
he's
like,
in
lost,
Up.
right? Like
He's trying to
right.
track down Kevin, and they finally introduce Kevin, and he's got like his army of dogs.
Yeah.
But it's still like he is the most mustache twirly bad guy again. But even he isn't full like he has little moments of redemption or moments where you see humanity, and where like Hopper is just an asshole to everybody and just mean to everybody, and there is no heart behind Hopper. Which makes, I would say, like the the kind of the ending for him, it makes it that much more satisfying for an audience to see him get gobbled down by a grasshopper or by a bird. But yeah, I think like it's definitely one of the like just more A to B kind of plots of a Pixar thing, and because they're trying to squeeze so much in there, I think it suffers. One of the things I wanted to touch on, because I went into this rewatch thinking about what you talked about, of the movie has a hard time figuring out which ending it wants to go with. And I think in the past you've described it as kind of like the Return of the King syndrome of like it has multiple endings. And I went in like with that kind of expectation, and I guess I can see that a little bit, but I think at least in how it sets up the ending, it kind of put all the pieces in place for the different phases of the ending. Because obviously like they have this big bird plan that gets it gets kind of put aside because everybody realizes it was Flick's idea, and they're like, this is not going to be a good idea. And so they put that aside, and then they end up bringing it back, but then the rainfall starts, and PT Flea comes in and sets it on fire, and so I think like all of the elements work for like why that sequence ends up being longer. Is that what you're kind of landing on, is that there are just too many parts to that ending?
Yeah, I mean, like I pull up the Wikipedia page, right, for like the plot, and like I can mark like a halfway point in that, right? And like to me, when they build the fake bird, that is them set up to be like the next day we're gonna use the fake bird. It's gonna be the movie, and it's gonna wrap up, right? And instead, it is this whole like there's the party, shit goes sideways, right? Like Flick has to go leave. They decide, oh, we're just gonna get him all this food, kind of thing. That happens. And then you'd think, okay, Flick will come back and like figure it out from there. But instead, the fake bird does come into play. It works, and then it doesn't work because it gets burned, right? And then there's like more stuff, and then like it's just like I think how many different beats it takes to get to the ending, right? Because I feel like up until
You didn't.
I guess the
So it
party
sounds like
where
you didn't
everything
need.
goes.
Yeah, you didn't need PT Flea to come back and be like, "Hey, everybody, the flaming thing is a hit, and let's do that," and to like reveal that it was all that they're circus bugs and all that stuff.
Right. I mean, like, because even after, because that's the thing too. Like, even after all that happens, and like, you know, all of the ants fight and Hopper goes away, um, like the rain then like that the whole sequence of the rain happens, right? And then Hopper takes Flick, and like all this stuff happens. Like, I guess for me, the movie is going at a pretty good clip up until the party. Like, it's going at a good pace where I'm like, oh yeah, like this feels natural. And then it feels like to me they then were like, great, and we've got the bird, we got the party, it's gonna be a nice heartwarming scene, and then tomorrow will be the wrap up kind of thing, and we'll be done. And they were like, this is only enough movie for like an hour. We need to add like 3 more beats and like 3 more different things happen. And like, I guess my issue with the last act is that it just kept feeling like other shit is happening to prevent them winning, right? Like, they beat Hopper like 3 times in that ending, and then like something will happen,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like, I guess that was sort of my, I guess it still is my frustration with the ending, is that like, because they keep doing these, I guess, like red herrings or like throwing wrenches in the plan of like the plan actually succeeding, it just stops the momentum every single time they do that again. So that it feels much more jarring for me versus like the first like 40 minutes are a pretty like jaunty, like fun ride, right? Versus at the end, and especially hearing you talk about it now, I would much rather have them just done one thing for the end and maybe have just like one twist and that be it, and use that extra time in the film to devote more to the circus troupe, right? And give like, you know, Brad Garrett's character more time, or Dennis Leary's character more time, right? Or these other people more time to shine, and less all packed in the end of like trick, trick, trick. Because for me at least, the characters are the best part of the movie in general, and so I want more of them and less of these like insect based action set pieces that are like, they're insects, this is all tiny.
Yeah.
I guess that would be my kind of answer to that.
Gotcha. There's definitely, there was like, I think with that mindset in mind, there was a moment when the rain starts and like they see the rain coming, because it's been set up that that's like the timetable. So I think the movie at least appropriately lays all the groundwork for all of those beats, and to your point, I think maybe to alleviate that, maybe they just didn't need to set up so many of those dominoes to fall at the end.
Right, yeah.
But there's an element where I was watching, and like when the rain happens, part of me was like, I wonder if this is because they just really wanted to show off how cool this tech is for 1998 or whatever. Like that wave of water coming is almost the go with me on this, because I think it probably would have been around the same time, but it's the dust storm in The Mummy with like the face coming out of it. It's that vibe. Or it would be, eventually when Lord of the Rings would do the same kind of water with like the horses riding out of it kind of really vibe. Funny. It's that without any like other thing coming out of it, but it is like it's a cool effect of being able to see just this flood of water coming towards them, and they're all screwed. But yeah, I can appreciate that it does have kind of like a very multifaceted mousetrap ending of, beat after beat after beat.
That's a good way to put it, I think.
Okay. Any other favorite moments or least favorite moments you want to touch on before we wrap up?
I do actually want to say that I do actually enjoy the like grasshopper like Western cantina scene. I think it's like a funny moment. And I actually like Richard Kind in this film. I think he is fun. But yeah, I mean, the grasshoppers are creepy. The queen is great. I love her dynamic. I love Dot and Julia Louis-Dreyfus's characters.
Ada.
Thank you. Ada's like relationship. They're fun and cute together. I think Ada and Flick have good chemistry together. But the last, I guess, big one would just be the cantina scene worked for me.
Yeah, I in that vein, I like kind of all of the like here's what a city looks like to bugs. And it is,
Yeah. Them go to the bar.
the bar, or the bugs riding, like even a detail I saw this time that I may have recognized at some other viewing or something, but realizing that when PT Flea is like doing the kind of like the reins, realizing that they're shoelaces, was like a fun little beat. And another thing that I didn't include in the trivia is the like the whole thing taking place in like the Casey Jr. cookie box or whatever is a direct reference to kind of the Dumbo. Um, but yeah, like it being like a animal crackers box kind of thing is like a fun, like it is that Honey I Shrunk the Kids kind of thing, but
Dynamic
like
to it,
let's
yeah.
do a like if bugs could be characters that created their own little metropolis, what would that look like?
Right.
And they even refer to it as, the big city kind of thing. So like I like those little like design flares and elements to this, and yeah, I think it could have been potentially fun to just spend more time there and less time in the like on an island under a tree, and it's just like stuff. That said, like I appreciate, all these years later, I still appreciate like that Flick is very much of the like work smarter not harder mentality, and he's trying to come up with all these ideas, and he's just kind of seen as like a, like everybody is too content to do things the way they've always been done. So I appreciate that by the end you get like everybody using his little like beanstalk saws and stuff like that. But yeah, it's definitely a movie that I think, while still fun, I do think like absolutely agree pales in comparison to so many of the ones,
ones
kind of surrounding it in those early years. And it was very much like that. Like I remember thinking like year after year after year, like Pixar would be in the like award conversation and stuff like that, and like not realizing until like years later and like in hindsight that like, oh yeah, I mean like they were part of the reason that you end up having a best animated film category, is because on some of these early ones they didn't, and and there wasn't enough out there to warrant it. But then you realize like, oh yeah, I guess some of these early ones maybe also didn't need it.
Yeah.
So yeah. But yeah, it's definitely like still a fun movie.
Yeah.
And I think there was a moment where like watching it again, I think with you in my head, like I took a break while watching it and was like, how much longer is there really in this movie? And it was like 40 minutes. I was like, what are they still doing the rest of this movie?
Yeah, right?
Like
Yeah.
it very much was that.
It is like that 40-minute mark where it's like, what is left?
Yeah. What is there still to do? I do, one last thing I want to give a shout out to is the like fun little bloopers that they throw in.
Yes.
I kind of like,
Okay.
I miss when Pixar did those little silly things. Especially if you watch the one that is like in the bonus features, the extras section on Disney Plus. One of the outtakes is somebody going up on a line, and Woody comes in and clicks the slate as if Woody is working on the film. That's a fun little thing. But yeah,
That
like
stuff is just
I miss those
very-
because it was just a fun era where it's like clearly they wrote and recorded all of those little like bits as bloopers and stuff. And then they I feel like they only did that for a couple movies and then kind of went away from it.
I always like that. Like that to me feels very of the era, right? Like this is the period where like, I think of like the bloopers after like each Rush Hour movie, right? Or like the shit, like any Jackie Chan movie you're ever gonna watch, right, is always gonna have the bloopers of him failing to do things, right, or flubbing a line, and so like that feels very late '90s, early 2000s. So like I really enjoy getting to see those again, because it's another kind of reminder of like when this movie, like kind of was made and came out.
Yeah. Cool. Let's go ahead and give it a grade. For the report card, where we grade from A+ to F. What do you want to give A Bug's Life here, Logan?
So to me, I don't know, maybe it's gonna sound harsh, but I'm gonna give Bug's Life a C. I think it is like a perfect image of like it meets expectations, right? It doesn't exceed them. It doesn't really go below them. And it just sort of like, it is average. It is a, 7 out of 10. And I think that is a totally fitting, representative of this. Like, there are worse Pixar movies. I haven't seen Good Dinosaur. But I've seen some other Pixar movies that I think are at the very least at the same level. And yeah, I think a C is pretty fitting for it.
Yeah, I think that's probably where I land with it too. Is
Yeah.
like, I mean, still like,
which is still good.
still
It's a passing grade.
still good, and still better than definitely some other things we've watched on that D Plus show. But yeah, it definitely doesn't have the like, doesn't have anything to really set it apart. Like I do remember, like, elements of it being imminently quotable. In particular, I remember like everybody, throughout high school being like, "I'm a beautiful butterfly," and just like being Heimlich. But like, yeah, for as much star power as in this movie, there is definitely a lot of like forgettable about it, which I think is unfortunate. But I think, I think Pixar very easily could have like continued going down that path, and I'm glad that they did not. I'm glad that, like, they got this kind of like, little rocky one out of their system. I think there's almost this weird element, especially in all of the like Bond stuff that you and I have been doing this year. This is the the man with the golden gun of the Moore era or whatever, except I significantly like this era of Pixar way better. But it is that, like, oh, the first one out, knocked it the park. Second one kind of dips, and then they'll bring it back around with the next outing. Yeah. Extra credit. Other suggestions if you like this. We have Finding Nemo, Monsters Inc., which will once again be next week's episode. Toy Story, Cars, Up, The Good Dinosaur, Inside Out, and The Incredibles. And then one last little one I threw out here is Jerry's Game, which is the short that would have kind of aired alongside this. So if you want like if you want to go back for the like seeing it in theaters kind of experience, go watch Jerry's Game on Disney Plus before this, and then enjoy A Bug's Life afterwards. Extracurriculars, you watch anything else on Disney Plus, or are you just kind of, because we talked last week, you're not watching Moon Knight, so
nope,
nothing on that front.
No, I might watch Jerry's Game.
There you go.
I don't know if I'll watch it on D Plus, but I might watch a couple of the shorts from Disney Pixar.
There you go.
Pixar.
Yeah, Jerry's Game is one of those, like,
it's a fun one.
It's a fun one. Yeah, it's the guy playing chess with himself.
It's an iconic one for me. Yeah,
definitely one of those early ones, and then especially because the guy would basically like that character model would return in Toy Story 2 the next year as like the
cleaner,
the cleaner, yeah,
little toy, yeah.
Well, cool. I am still keeping up with Moon Knight for that side of things. I'm enjoying it. I like it's definitely one where, like, I think I'd mentioned last week, like, it hasn't hooked me in the same way that like WandaVision did. But Oscar Isaac is a ton of fun to watch, and I'm still certainly intrigued. Oscar Isaac and Ethan Hawke. Ethan Hawke's really good in this too. And I'm very intrigued to see like where the story wraps up, because there's only 2 episodes left at this point. And the end of this most recent episode very much like seems to take things in a very different direction compared to the 3 episodes before it. So, yeah, I'll be curious to see where it goes, but that is that. So yeah, that is going to do it for this episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you, Logan, for joining me to talk all about A Bug's Life here. You can follow Logan at Lefty Logie. Anything you want to give a shout out to there, Logan?
I will give a shout out to all the great stuff you can find at that nerdy site. But in particular, I'll give a shout out to the Let's Plays running Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday on the YouTube channel, with Trevor doing Tuesday and Thursdays and Cameron doing his Friday night Dying Light's Let's Play tour of Dying Light 2, which I can only imagine will end up having 50 episodes of that one. But go check out all those good Let's Plays. Cool.
You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. I will echo those shout outs. I will also shout out That Bond Show. This weekend's episode you can catch on Saturday over at youtube.com/thatnerdysite. This weekend we enter the Brosnan era with GoldenEye.
Yes.
And have that fun one that is, an iconic one from both of our childhoods, and would have been the first one I would have really ever seen. So it was fun revisiting that. Here,
It's great.
Some 4 months into to this series of having to sit through all of the other ones that I did not enjoy, but finally getting to these fun ones is a nice. So go check that out. YouTube.com/thatnerdysite. Every Saturday, new episodes going up there. You can follow all of the latest from us over at That Nerdy Site. And just again, a little future programming here on That D Plus Show. Next week, we're going to wrap up our Pixar month here with Monsters, Inc. Then beyond that, first week of May is probably going to be
Obi-Wan.
Something Star Wars themed. I have not really settled on anything because I'm kind of leaving it open in case they do a May the 4th be with you kind of sudden release. But if not that, I'll probably put out to do let's do an episode of Rebels or something Star Warsy like that. And then following that, we will have the kind of wrap up for Moon Knight, because it will end there in the second week. And then the month will end with Obi-Wan Kenobi, kind of the first episode of that. So that's a little bit of a look ahead to what to expect in May. Still got a couple things to slot in there, so maybe we'll find some other random little one-offs to sit down and discuss. But yeah, so stay tuned for all that. You find all the latest from us over at That Nerdy Site. Once again, if you liked what you heard, please like, rate, review, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Thank you for joining us. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other, and class dismissed.